Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Smiling Frame channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie The Fast and the Furious from 2001. The story kicks off with Brian O'Connor, still riding the high of his undercover success, though that success ultimately cost him his badge. We see him tearing through Miami streets in a souped-up ride, his natural talent for driving a spectacle even when he's technically off the clock. It's clear that the thrill of the illegal street racing scene, something he first experienced deeply while infiltrating Dom Toretto's crew, is where he feels most alive, even if it's a path that leads straight to trouble. He's quickly picked up by the law, but instead of being jailed, he's presented with a lifeline by his former superior, Bilkins, and Agent Markham. They need him back in the game, this time to go undercover in the high-stakes, illicit world of L.A. street racing to catch a major player, Carter Veron. Veroni is the kingpin of drug trafficking, operating under the guise of legitimate business, using these races as a front for moving massive amounts of cash. Brian is offered full amnesty if he can bring Veron down from the inside. To navigate this treacherous environment, Brian needs a partner, someone who knows the lingo and can blend in completely. He naturally turns to his old friend, Roman Pierce. Roman, a childhood friend of Brian's who has spent significant time navigating the penal system due to a past conviction, often for crimes that felt unfairly judged, much like the sense of injustice Brian felt when he let Dom go, is initially hesitant. Roman's own driving skills are legendary, honed through years of necessity and ambition, and he agrees only because the payoff promises a life free from constant scrutiny. The partnership between Brian and Roman is immediately combustible. They have a history, shared moments of youth and loyalty, but also a deep-seated tension stemming from their diverging paths and Brian's history with law enforcement. They are tasked with entering Veroni's inner circle by winning races and gaining his trust. Brian and Roman acquire new, ridiculously fast cars, immediately setting the stage for the kind of visceral, engine-roaring action that defines this world. They manage to impress Veroni enough to be brought on as drivers for his next big shipment. The core of the plan is to use the cover of a planned drug run to track the money laundering operation back to Veron himself. Their mission is complicated by the presence of Monica Fuentes, an undercover U.S. Customs agent. Monica is sharp, relentless, and has already infiltrated Veron's organization, working closely with him. She and Brian share a charged history, a connection that adds another layer of risk to the operation. If Veroni discovers her identity, or if Brian's cover is blown due to his past relationship with her, everything unravels. As Brian and Roman get closer to Veron, the danger escalates. They are put through a series of stressful tests by Veron, including a harrowing speedboat chase that tests their driving and their nerve. The pressure forces Brian and Roman to rely on each other in ways they haven't since childhood, mending the rifts between them through shared peril. Roman, in particular, begins to see Brian's commitment to doing things the right way, even when operating outside the lines. The climax arrives during the execution of the supposed drug transport. Brian and Roman, realizing they've been set up as fall guys to take the heat for the money, execute a brilliant counter-plan, coordinating with Monica and the federal agents waiting on the sidelines. They use their mastery of car control and street knowledge, not just to evade Veroni's heavily armed thugs, but to secure the evidence and the actual cash, separating the criminals from their illicit gains. In a final, spectacular sequence involving a massive, coordinated vehicular assault, they manage to corner Veron. Brian and Roman, driving with practiced synchronization that speaks to their inherent talent, successfully trap Veron and secure the evidence needed to lock him away for good. The operation is a success. Veron is apprehended, and the authorities honor their deal. Brian not only receives his amnesty, but also walks away clean, having proved his capabilities under extreme pressure. Roman, seeing the positive result, and perhaps inspired by Brian's dedication to making a real difference, is also cleared and finally free to pursue his life without the shadow of the law looming over him. As a final gesture of respect and friendship, Brian leaves one of the seized, beautiful cars for Roman, before quietly driving off into the sunset, choosing the open road and his own definition of freedom. Once again, the initial sting of Brian losing his badge still hangs heavy in the air, a tangible consequence of his loyalty to Dom, a loyalty rooted in the shared, almost spiritual connection forged over the roar of engines and the scent of burning rubber. When he's plucked from the Miami pavement by Bilkins and Markham, the offer of redemption feels less like a lifeline and more like a trap laid by the very system he's always struggled to fit within. He's a natural operator, better behind the wheel than behind a desk, and this chance to right a wrong, to take down a major criminal like Veron, appeals to his sense of justice, however skewed it might be. Bringing Roman back into the fold is a complicated maneuver, thick with history. Roman Pierce, perpetually simmering with the frustration of having his potential curtailed by wrongful conviction and time served, views the world through a lens of deep-seated cynicism. His skill at driving isn't just a hobby, it's a survival mechanism honed in the tight, unforgiving confines of correctional facilities and the desperate need to prove himself in a society that judged him before he could speak. When Brian lays out the plan, Roman's agreement is laced with sarcasm, a defense mechanism against allowing himself to hope for anything real. He needs the amnesty, desperately, to escape the crushing weight of his past, but he also needs to see Brian succeed without compromising the messy, morally gray world they both inhabit. Their reunion in the customized garage space, surrounded by gleaming metal, is electric. Brian, the clean-cut cop-turned-racer, and Roman, the street-smart exile, are an unlikely duo, their banter a rapid-fire exchange masking profound trust. Acquiring their vehicles, sleek, powerful machines, perfectly suited for the kind of high-velocity deception they are about to attempt, is a rite of passage back into this dangerous playground. They aren't just driving cars, they are wielding kinetic energy as their primary weapon. Veron's mansion, a fortress of ill-gotten gains, feels suffocating, an environment where every smile is a potential trap. Carter Verone himself is a portrait of predatory calm, a man whose power emanates not from brute force, but from intricate financial control, a dark mirror to the legitimate businesses he exploits. He watches Brian and Roman with unnerving scrutiny, testing their mettle. The initial races they participate in are less about speed and more about demonstrating absolute control under pressure, a performance meant to lull Veron into believing they are merely greedy entrepreneurs, not federal assets. The true complication arrives with Monica Fuentes. She moves through Veron's circle with an understated elegance that barely conceals the steel underneath. Brian recognizes the intensity in her eyes immediately. It mirrors the focus he himself adopts when deep undercover. Their past connection, perhaps a brief, charged encounter before his first major assignment, adds a layer of perilous intimacy to the mission. Every shared glance between them is a risk assessment, a calculation of how close they are to blowing their covers. The tension ratchets up significantly when Veron tasks them with the transport. It's a classic move. Use the newcomers as mules and sacrificial lambs for a massive drug run, ensuring they take the fall while Veron moves his money untouched. This maneuver forces Brian and Roman into an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities. Roman's sharp critiques of Brian's lingering idealism clash with Brian's need to maintain the facade of the detached criminal, yet beneath the friction, their shared history, the scraped knees and shared dreams of their youth, surfaces. They begin to operate as one unit, their driving styles complementing each other perfectly, a testament to innate talent forged by years of practice. The climax isn't just about outdriving the opposition. It's an act of calculated anarchy against Veron's structure. When the moment arrives to seize the money and expose Veron, Brian and Roman execute a dazzling display of vehicular choreography. They use their knowledge of the city's arteries and their car's capabilities to isolate Veron's convoy, turning the drug run into a trap for the traffickers themselves. The final confrontation is less a shootout and more a brilliantly orchestrated demolition derby, where precision driving dismantles a criminal empire brick by brick. Watching Veron finally subdued, the weight of the operation dissolving, there is a palpable shift in Brian and Roman. They achieved what the system couldn't easily grasp, dismantling a powerful criminal while adhering to a higher, albeit self-imposed, code. Brian, having walked the tightrope between law and lawlessness, earns his freedom not by conforming, but by dominating the game on his own terms. Roman, seeing the tangible success wrought by his own skills finally recognized, sheds some of his bitterness. The gesture of leaving the high-performance car behind is more than just a thank you. It's an acknowledgement that, for a moment, they were truly partners again, united in skill and purpose. Brian drives away, not looking back at the life he helped clean up, but forward toward the infinite horizon, the ultimate freedom found only on the open road. The dust settled, leaving Brian O'Connor with the clean slate he desperately craved, yet the silence felt louder than the roar of any engine. His amnesty was secure, a testament to his uncanny ability to perform under the most intense pressure, a trait he first honed learning the rules of the road from the unforgiving asphalt of underground circuits. He had stepped back into the fray as an agent of the system, but ultimately he finished as a master strategist who bent the system to his will. The parting moment with Roman, leaving that immaculate, fast machine, was a quiet recognition of the bond that transcends jurisdiction and handcuffs, a bond forged in shared adrenaline. However, the landscape of high-speed maneuvering doesn't remain static for long, especially for someone with Brian's profile. He hadn't just walked away from a life. He had left a void, a vacancy at the apex of illegal street performance that others are naturally drawn to fill. Whispers start to circulate, not of federal busts or organized crime takedowns, but of new challengers, drivers emerging from the shadows who operate with a precision that suggests professional training, yet an arrogance that screams fresh ambition. These aren't just street racers seeking bragging rights. They are highly skilled operators using their vehicles as tools for more sophisticated, perhaps even cross-border activities. It is this escalating level of organized, illicit driving, the kind that attracts unwanted governmental attention and blurs the lines between sport and smuggling, that invariably pulls Brian back, not by official summons this time, but by reputation. He finds himself drawn to the periphery of these new scenes, initially as an observer, perhaps testing a newly acquired vehicle in the desolate stretches outside the city limits, just to feel the familiar G-force pressing him into the seat. He's searching for the purity of the race, the intellectual challenge of outmaneuvering another skilled mind, divorced from the moral compromises of his undercover work. The real pull comes when he recognizes a familiar signature, a specific, almost theatrical style of cornering that reminds him of the disciplined, almost militaristic approach to driving he once possessed, perhaps seeing echoes of his own past self in these new antagonists. This new competition isn't about Veron's crude drug money. It feels more refined, involving high-value assets or technology moved across state lines with unnerving efficiency. The thrill of the chase begins to reassert itself, not as a job, but as an innate need to prove that his mastery, unburdened by regulations, remains unmatched. He is drawn back to the street, not as a cop and not as a criminal, but as the ultimate arbiter of speed and control. The freedom Brian tasted upon leaving Los Angeles was intoxicating, a rare vintage he savored in the anonymity of open highways. He moved with a practiced stealth, his reputation preceding him like a phantom engine noise, yet he maintained a calculated distance from any fixed location, his hands, so adept at manipulating the delicate controls of a finely tuned machine, felt strangely empty without the immediate demand of a mission. This period of self-imposed exile was essential. He was recalibrating, understanding where the disciplined structure of law enforcement ended and the boundless creativity of pure driving began. He sought out those isolated testing grounds, places where the only witness to his speed was the wind and the asphalt geometry of the turns. But the echoes of his last victory were loud. The sheer scale of the operation he and Roman dismantled, the efficiency with which they dismantled Veron's network, did not go unnoticed by those operating in the far more shadowy fringes of international transport. Brian starts picking up chatter on private channels, hushed conversations referencing drivers who operate with the ruthless efficiency of former special forces, but apply that discipline to the art of vehicular smuggling. These new players aren't content with local territory. They are moving high-grade contraband, perhaps even utilizing modified vehicles for clandestine border crossings, activities that require a level of driving genius Brian recognizes as disturbingly similar to the rigorous training he himself received. The narrative hooks him when he witnesses one of these new crews in action during a late-night run through the sprawling industrial ports. He sees a sequence of evasive maneuvers, a perfectly timed drift around a tight corner, followed by an impossible acceleration through a narrow loading bay that is too precise, too practiced to be mere street bravado. It carries the cold, calculated arrogance of someone who has been taught to prioritize the payload over the pursuit. This isn't the chaotic energy of Dom's old crew, nor the greedy desperation of Veroni's thugs. This is specialized, disciplined execution, and it chafes at Brian's sense of superiority. His old instincts flare up, a familiar warmth spreading through his chest as he realizes he has a puzzle to solve, a performance standard to exceed. He doesn't immediately reach for a badge or a federal contact. That world is behind him, at least for now. Instead, he begins to source a new machine, something purpose-built, blending the raw power he loves with the subtle, almost invisible technology required to track and intercept targets moving under the radar of conventional law enforcement. He sees these new operators as a challenge to his very identity. If he can't beat them at their own high-stakes game, then his defining skill is diminished. It becomes an internal audit. Can Brian O'Connor, the man who chose the road over the badge, still claim mastery over the ultimate expression of vehicular capability when pitted against the very best who have weaponized that skill? The answer, he suspects, lies just beyond the next horizon line, where the risk is highest and the reward is proving, purely to himself, that he remains unrivaled. The anonymity Brian sought was thin camouflage, a gossamer shield that the automotive underworld seemed adept at piercing. He found himself increasingly drawn to the fringes, places where the air itself seemed charged with illicit energy, places where modified engines idled with predatory patience. His new vehicle, a careful blend of street aggression and technological subtlety, felt like an extension of his own restless intellect, a tool for observation rather than open confrontation. He wasn't hunting for trouble, but rather trouble, in the form of organized, highly skilled drivers, was being organized around the vacuum he had left. The confirmation of his fears arrived not through a tip-off, but through an intuitive recognition of superior technique. During a poorly lit, high-speed transit near the Mexican border, a zone notorious for sophisticated smuggling operations, Brian witnessed a convoy move with clockwork precision. These weren't racers showing off. These were professionals ensuring the integrity of their cargo across immense distances. One driver, maneuvering a heavily modified sedan through a series of tight, rapid switchbacks designed to lose any tail, employed a technique Brian vaguely recalled from a forgotten manual on counter-surveillance driving, a blend of rally precision and flat-track aggression. What truly ignited Brian's interest, however, was the driver's visible temperament. There was a cold, almost aristocratic disdain in the way the driver handled the vehicle, as if the act of driving flawlessly was beneath him, a mere prerequisite for the actual illicit business. This attitude struck a chord deep within Brian, touching upon the arrogance he himself had to shed when working undercover. He sensed a leader, someone who viewed driving less as an art form and more as a logistical necessity to be conquered. Brian began to pursue the ghost of this operation, dedicating weeks to mapping their likely routes, analyzing patterns in the seized, low-level contraband that occasionally made headlines. He realized these smugglers were utilizing knowledge only available to those with access to high-level infrastructure data, a sophistication far beyond street racers like Veron. It suggested connections running deep into logistics networks, perhaps even compromised port authorities or border patrol personnel. This pursuit became intensely personal. It wasn't about amnesty or bringing down a kingpin. It was about defending the purity of the driving skill itself from being co-opted by organized theft and smuggling. He felt a strange, protective impulse over the sport he loved, believing that true speed should be met with equal, untainted opposition. He needed an edge, something beyond raw horsepower, and that realization brought a familiar, unwelcome name back to the forefront of his mind: Roman. If this game required audacious planning, perfect timing, and a partner who could execute the insane risks Brian inevitably dreamed up, Roman Pierce was the only man for the job. Even if convincing him required a level of manipulation Brian was now more adept at than ever before. The open road was calling him back, but this time the destination was not freedom, but a necessary collision. The thought of pulling Roman back into this vortex of vehicular jeopardy brought a flicker of hesitation, a brief moral pause that Brian hadn't permitted himself during the Veron debacle. Roman had finally secured his footing, tasting genuine liberation, and to drag him back into the life of high-stakes deception felt like betraying the fragile peace they had both earned. Yet Brian rationalized it quickly. This wasn't federal work. This was a self-appointed mission to safeguard the integrity of the driving world from becoming a mere tool for organized, high-level larceny. Besides, who else possessed the sheer, unhinged audacity required to intercept cargo being moved by professionals using insider knowledge? He tracked Roman down to a bustling, sun-drenched locale, likely a place Roman had managed to buy outright, a physical manifestation of his hard-won autonomy. Roman, initially, was a fortress of practiced resistance. His cynicism had deepened, hardening into a reliable shell against disappointment. When Brian laid out the schematic of the new operation, the near-invisible logistics, the drivers who possessed tactical training, Roman's skepticism was evident in the slow shake of his head and the dry retort that dripped with irony. "Another clean-up detail, Brian. You really can't just enjoy that sunset you drove towards, can you? You need the adrenaline like a vampire needs blood." Brian didn't argue the point. He simply showed Roman the blurry surveillance stills of the lead driver, the one with the cold, calculated demeanor. He didn't need to say much. Roman understood the silent language of exceptional skill recognized by an equal. It wasn't about the money this time. It was about the performance, the technical superiority of the opposition. Roman, whose own time incarcerated, had been fueled by the burning certainty that his driving talent was superior to those who locked him away, recognized the threat to his self-image. A professional challenge that demanded his unique brand of controlled chaos was, ultimately, irresistible. Fine, Roman conceded, the word tasting like surrender, wrapped in a promise of exhilarating danger. But this time, we set the terms. No more government cleanups. We do this for the respect, and we walk away clean forever. He needed the high-stakes environment to validate his own resurrection, to prove that his time on the outside was earned through skill, not just luck. Their preparation was meticulous, a direct contrast to the almost frantic energy of the Veron investigation. They treated this like a specialized engineering problem. Brian focused on the electronic countermeasures and tracking systems needed to penetrate the smugglers' secure network, leveraging his technical background. Roman, meanwhile, obsessed over vehicle modifications, demanding suspension adjustments and engine tuning that allowed for sustained, unpredictable bursts of speed across varied terrain, a necessary element when facing opponents who knew the geography intimately. They weren't just aiming to win a race. They were planning to disrupt a supply chain using kinetic force. The bond between them reformed, not as the naive loyalty of youth, but as the hardened alliance of two masters, recognizing that only together could they match the cold, organized threat they now faced on the open road. The alliance between Brian and Roman, now reinforced with the grim knowledge of their opponent's professionalism, shifted their operational focus entirely. They moved from the loud, flamboyant displays of street racing to the silent, strategic warfare conducted under the cloak of night along remote logistical arteries. Brian understood that these smugglers operated on tight schedules, their movements dictated by shipping manifests and border patrol shifts, making predictability their greatest vulnerability. He spent countless hours hunched over topographical maps and encrypted data feeds, searching for the seams in the enemy's seemingly flawless logistical armor. His desire wasn't just to win, but to dismantle their system so thoroughly that the entire route became untenable for future operations, a definitive statement. Roman, meanwhile, turned their chosen vehicles, sleek, deceptively powerful machines, into instruments of surgical disruption. He took Brian's theoretical attack vectors and translated them into precise driving challenges. There was a renewed intensity in his work. He wasn't just building fast cars anymore. He was building defensive systems wrapped in speed. He installed custom kinetic dampeners and communication jammers, equipment designed not to win a drag race, but to survive a calculated ambush on a high-speed highway. His commitment stemmed from a deep-seated need to never again be controlled by the system, and fighting opponents who embodied calculated control resonated deeply with his newfound autonomy. Their first direct engagement was a reconnaissance mission disguised as a casual cruise near a known transfer point in Arizona. They observed the target vehicle, a blacked-out utility truck moving suspiciously slowly despite the open road, clearly waiting for a secure window. Brian noticed the subtle electronic signature radiating from the truck, a high-frequency signal that indicated active, encrypted communication. He knew immediate interception was impossible. They needed to force the convoy to break formation. Brian initiated the plan, a calculated, non-violent disruption. He positioned his car to appear as a roadside breakdown, feigning engine trouble in the middle of the convoy's path. When the lead escort vehicle, a muscle car driven with surprising restraint, approached to assess the situation, Roman executed his move. From a hidden position, he burst onto the road, not attacking the escort, but using his vehicle's specialized chassis to create a near-miss collision with the truck itself, expertly maneuvering to disable only the truck's communication antennae without damaging the main payload area. The ensuing chaos was instantaneous. The escort driver, trained for external threats, was momentarily paralyzed by the internal disruption. In that fractured moment of confusion, Brian shed his facade of mechanical failure. His car roared to life, not with the raw aggression of his past, but with the laser focus of a hunter. He locked onto the lead escort, using his vehicle's superior handling to pin the professional driver against the retaining wall, not crushing him, but effectively immobilizing him long enough for Roman to plant a miniature tracking beacon onto the utility truck's undercarriage. The exchange was over in less than 45 seconds, a blur of calculated risk and perfect timing. They didn't steal anything, they merely tagged the prize, leaving the disoriented smugglers to wonder if they had been sabotaged by a rival crew or by sheer bad luck. As they sped away, leaving the confused convoy in their dust, the satisfaction wasn't just in the execution, but in the mutual understanding that they had just outthought an enemy that was far more organized than any they had faced before. They were no longer just drivers. They were vehicular insurgents. The successful tagging of the smuggler's truck validated their tactical shift. It was a testament to how Brian's meticulous planning, informed by his time within federal parameters, meshed seamlessly with Roman's innate, aggressive improvisation. They weren't just reacting to the situation, they were engineering it. The tracker they affixed was a piece of custom hardware, a small victory in itself, designed by Brian to broadcast its signal only through a narrow, unique frequency that only their onboard system could decipher. A silent conversation happening beneath the noise of everyday traffic. For the next 72 hours, Brian and Roman lived inside the data stream, following the truck's slow, methodical journey across state lines. They established a rotating surveillance pattern, never staying in one place long enough to be noticed, their own movements mirroring the fluid, almost liquid efficiency of the smugglers they were tracking. Roman found a perverse joy in this sustained pressure, often commenting on the irony that the government couldn't achieve this level of sustained surveillance. Yet here they were, two men operating entirely off the grid, executing a flawless stakeout. This, Roman grumbled one night, watching the target truck idling in a dimly lit distribution yard, is what they pay actual spies millions for, and we're doing it for the principle of the thing. The true objective became clear when the truck finally rendezvoused not with another truck, but with a small private airstrip tucked away in a remote Nevada valley. The cargo wasn't narcotics or cash. The manifest, glimpsed briefly by Brian using a powerful long-range camera, suggested highly specialized electronic components, likely sensitive military or aerospace technology being illegally exported. This elevated the stakes exponentially. They weren't dealing with organized crime anymore, but potentially international espionage, where failure meant not just personal peril, but massive geopolitical fallout. The confrontation at the airfield was inevitable, and required a level of synchronized risk that dwarfed their previous exploits. The setting, a vast, flat expanse under the cold glare of runway lights, demanded absolute precision. Their plan was audacious. Strike simultaneously during the loading process, using their superior speed not to escape, but to physically obstruct the transfer of the sensitive cargo onto the awaiting transport plane. Brian took the high ground, utilizing the elevation of the surrounding desert terrain. He positioned himself to cut off any ground escape route for the smugglers' escort vehicles. Roman, however, would execute the direct assault. He had modified his vehicle with a reinforced front bumper, not for brute force, but to hook and tow specific sections of the mobile loading ramp, intending to tilt the entire loading apparatus, spilling the high-value components onto the tarmac. As Roman screamed across the tarmac, an absolute blur of controlled violence, the smugglers reacted with frightening speed, drivers instantly abandoning the loading process to engage. The escort vehicles, recognizing the direct threat to the payload, executed counter-maneuvers that showed clear military training. Brian had to abandon his vantage point sooner than planned, diving into the fray to draw fire and attention away from Roman's critical, momentum-dependent maneuver. The air filled with the screech of tires fighting for purchase on the asphalt, and the dull thud of impact as Brian's machine absorbed glancing blows meant for Roman's vehicle. It was a desperate dance of vehicular sacrifice, each man pushing his machine and his own limits to protect the other's objective. A testament to a loyalty forged not in friendship alone, but in the shared knowledge that only their combined genius could navigate this precipice. The chaos at the private airstrip was precisely the crucible Brian needed to temper his return to the shadows. Roman's maneuver with the loading ramp was textbook reckless brilliance. The tilt was achieved, sending crates of specialized electronics scattering across the tarmac like expensive dice. The impact, however, was heavier than anticipated. Brian, drawing the attention of 3 escort vehicles, drivers who clearly understood tactical positioning, found himself immediately outnumbered and under sustained pressure. These men drove with the grim determination of professionals whose entire operation was collapsing around them, a stark contrast to the often sloppy greed of street thugs. Brian's driving became a defensive masterpiece. He utilized the perimeter barriers of the airfield, treating the obstacles not as hazards, but as opportunities to force the opponents into predictable lines. He executed a high-speed power slide, using the resulting cloud of dirt and dust to break their visual lock, a technique he learned years ago when the stakes were merely keeping Dom one step ahead of the LAPD. But these men were quick to adapt. One escort managed to flank him, trying to use a disciplined pit maneuver. Brian countered by slamming the brakes just as the opponent committed, causing the escort car to overshoot violently, careening toward the stationary transport plane. Meanwhile, Roman was battling for control of the spilled cargo. His goal wasn't to retrieve the components, but to ensure the pilots couldn't easily load them back onto the waiting jet. He was using his reinforced car like a battering ram, nudging crates into positions that physically blocked the ramp access, all while fending off a dedicated pursuit driver who seemed utterly focused on neutralizing Roman specifically, perhaps recognizing him as the primary disruptor. Roman's adrenaline fueled a reckless creativity. At one point, he intentionally spun his car sideways across a crate, using the friction to halt his momentum instantly before accelerating out in the opposite direction, leaving his pursuer struggling to recover from the sudden change in vector. The turning point came when Brian, seeing Roman isolated momentarily, executed a desperate move. He intentionally drove his car into the path of one of the closing escort vehicles, not a full collision, but a glancing blow designed to cripple its steering linkage. The resulting spin sent the escort car skidding directly into the path of the remaining aircraft ground crew attempting to secure the area. With the immediate threat neutralized, Brian quickly reoriented, his own vehicle smoking and protesting from the impacts. Seeing his partner battered but still fighting, Roman felt a surge of loyalty that transcended their usual banter. He abandoned the cargo defense momentarily, roaring over to cover Brian's retreat path from the last active escort. Together, they formed a protective wedge, driving back-to-back, using their combined momentum to force the final threat off the active runway area and into the open desert where speed advantage was neutralized. As the distant, faint sound of legitimate federal sirens began to approach, Brian had ensured a failsafe had been triggered, calling in authorities once the cargo transfer was undeniably interrupted. Brian and Roman knew their time was up. They hadn't secured the evidence in a neat package, but they had successfully destroyed the smuggling operation's objective and exposed their methods. In a final, unspoken agreement, they split, vanishing into the pre-planned labyrinth of service roads surrounding the valley. This wasn't about amnesty or legality anymore. It was about survival and the shared, fierce pride of having executed an impossible plan against truly dangerous opposition. Brian drove toward the rising sun, already plotting how he could keep his vehicle functional long enough to meet Roman at their predetermined safe point, knowing that this shared, high-stakes defiance had cemented their bond more firmly than any parole agreement ever could. The escape from the Nevada airfield was a chaotic symphony of stressed metal and desperation, a far cry from the clean victories of the past. Brian felt every impact rattling through his chassis. His car was bleeding performance, held together by sheer willpower and the high-grade engineering Roman insisted upon. But the feeling of outmaneuvering that highly disciplined, clandestine organization was a potent drug, eclipsing the pain of the damage. They hadn't just beaten street thugs. They had successfully derailed a high-level technological theft, and they had done it entirely on their own terms, without a single badge in sight. Their rendezvous point was a forgotten, cavernous warehouse miles from the nearest town, a place that smelled of brine and disuse, the perfect tomb for their battle-worn vehicles. As they pulled in, both cars sputtering protests, a palpable sense of exhaustion mixed with triumph settled over them. Roman killed his engine first, leaning back against the seat, a rare, genuine grin stretching across his face. "See, Brian, that was pure. No politicians, no paperwork, just us making things move exactly how they shouldn't." Brian, quieter, was already out of his car examining the damage. He needed to make sure the pursuit of the smugglers would be handled by the authorities they'd indirectly alerted, not by them directly. He was acutely aware that stepping back into the official radar, even as a hero, risked unraveling the amnesty he still valued. This mission, their secret partnership, needed to remain precisely that. A secret shared between two men who understood that true justice sometimes required a detour through illegality. The aftermath brought a brief period of quiet reflection, a shared recognition that they had both faced down, a level of opposition that tested the very core of their driving philosophies. Roman seemed revitalized, the cynicism momentarily burned away by the clarity of purpose. He had fought against men who used driving as a sterile, cold tool, and Roman, for all his past grievances, still viewed driving as a passionate, visceral art form. He had proven that his street-honed skills could conquer disciplined professionalism. For Brian, the experience crystallized his current existence. He couldn't go back to the structured world. The thrill of operating in the gray areas, making decisions based on instinct rather than regulation, had become essential to his identity. He had proven he could function outside the lines, and doing so had delivered a more profound sense of accomplishment than any commendation ever could. Their parting this time felt different. There was no need for grand gestures, only a solemn understanding. Roman was heading off to build his legitimate empire, now with a renewed sense of self-worth. Brian stood watching him load crucial, salvaged components from his own damaged car into Roman's still-functional vehicle, a silent exchange of technology and trust. As Roman prepared to leave, he looked at Brian, not with mockery, but with respect. "Don't get caught playing house again, Brian. If you ever need a ghost to run interference, you know the frequency." Brian nodded, watching his oldest friend drive away, finally free and empowered by his own capabilities. Brian himself stood alone in the vast warehouse, looking at his own damaged machine. The immediate danger was past, the existential challenge met. He didn't look towards the highways leading to the bustling city centers or the federal offices. Instead, he turned his attention to the tools laid out on a workbench: scanners, signal boosters, and schematics for an entirely new, untraceable vehicle. The world was vast, and the shadows were always moving. He still had the itch, the need to measure himself against the best, and somewhere out there, another road, another challenge, was already being paved in anticipation of the man who refused to stay still. The silence of the warehouse after Roman's departure was heavy, the air thick with the metallic scent of cooling engines and spent adrenaline. Brian surveyed the wreckage of his own car, the finely tuned machine a testament to the brutal efficiency of their last confrontation. It wasn't just metal that needed repair, it was the constant calibration of his own moral compass that required attention. He knew he was addicted to the edge, the point where legal action dissolved into necessary force, and that addiction was now deeply intertwined with the pursuit of mastery. He couldn't simply walk away and enjoy the quiet stability of a clean slate. The very structure of his being demanded the next, more intricate challenge. His focus shifted immediately to rebuilding, but not just the car. He began sourcing components with the surgical precision of a man who knew exactly what kind of anonymity he needed to achieve. He dismissed the idea of purchasing high-end, traceable sports cars. Instead, he sought out obscure, industrial-grade chassis, the kind of utilitarian vehicles that blended into fleets of construction or utility services, vehicles that screamed boring, but housed terrifyingly advanced capabilities. He integrated signal masking technology derived from the schematics he'd glimpsed during the smuggling operation, effectively creating a mobile blind spot. Brian found himself drawn to tracking the fallout of the Nevada incident. While the authorities, likely alerted by his contingency signal, descended upon the airfield, he was more interested in the vacuum left behind by the defeated smuggling ring. Professionals like those were rarely solitary operators. They were cells in a larger network. He began studying international shipping lanes and customs logs, not as an investigator, but as a potential interceptor. He was looking for the next high-value, high-risk transfer, the one that would necessitate a driver of his unique, dual-skilled caliber. His inspiration was shifting subtly. Dom Toretto had always driven for family and defiance. Roman drove for survival and liberation. Brian, having tasted both worlds, was starting to drive for the sheer intellectual purity of optimization. How fast, how unnoticed, how perfectly can a machine and its operator perform under the most impossible constraints? This new endeavor wasn't about loyalty to any external entity. It was a solitary quest for vehicular apotheosis. He spent weeks refining a new approach to navigation, moving beyond GPS reliance to complex predictive modeling based on traffic flow algorithms and infrastructure vulnerabilities. He started taking solo runs in the dead of night across state lines, not fleeing anything, but testing the boundaries of his new creation. These runs were silent, efficient, and devoid of unnecessary flair, a maturation of his driving style, shedding the youthful exuberance that had once defined him. He was becoming the phantom the smugglers had feared, an unpredictable element that existed purely to disrupt highly organized, high-value operations that preyed on systemic weakness. He was becoming the ghost in the machine, waiting for the next clear signal that demanded his specific, untraceable brand of intervention. The open road wasn't just freedom, it was his new jurisdiction. The shimmering heat haze above Los Angeles provides the initial visual texture for The Fast and the Furious, a film that, in retrospect, functions less as a simple action flick and more as a cultural artifact capturing a specific moment in early 21st century cinema. Its narrative engine is driven by the inherent tension between professional duty and personal loyalty, centered around Dominic Toretto and Brian O'Connor. Toretto, embodied by Vin Diesel, with a stoicism that already hinted at the global franchise behemoth he would become, operates within a fiercely defined moral code rooted in family and street credibility. His background, subtly implied through his deep connection to the mechanics of his cars and his protective instincts over his crew, speaks to a life built outside conventional structures. This authenticity is critical. His dominance in the illegal street racing scene isn't just about speed, but about mastery and respect earned through unwavering commitment to his chosen path. The film frames his world not as purely criminal, but as a highly specialized, high-stakes subculture where performance is the ultimate currency. Brian O'Connor, played by Paul Walker, serves as the necessary catalyst and the audience's entry point. Walker, who was already establishing himself as a capable leading man, adept at portraying youthful ambiguity, here embodies the outsider struggling with assimilation. His undercover mission for the FBI forces him into a crucible where the lines between observation and participation blur rapidly. The vehicle he uses, the undercover identity, becomes his protective shell, one that eventually cracks under the weight of genuine connection. His fascination with Toretto's crew, particularly the mechanical prowess and the sheer freedom they represent, is palpable. This is a man seeking belonging, whether in the structured hierarchy of law enforcement or the chaotic family of the streets. The film's signature element, the street racing sequences, are choreographed with an emphasis on visceral feedback rather than sheer technological gloss, distinguishing it from later entries in the series. These races are personal duels, often decided by nerve and mechanical intuition rather than purely digital advantage. The visual language employs tight close-ups on roaring engines, shifting transmissions, and the intense focus in the driver's eyes. The famous vault scene, while perhaps the most unbelievable piece of physics in the franchise's nascent stage, perfectly encapsulates the film's core ethos. If you have enough heart and the right crew, conventional limitations become suggestions. Mia Toretto, providing the crucial emotional bridge between the two protagonists, is more than just a romantic interest. She represents the stabilizing force of the Toretto family unit. Her intelligence and quiet observation allow her to navigate the dangerous waters between her brother's life and Brian's deception. Her choices illustrate the film's central conflict. Is loyalty defined by blood or by shared experience under pressure? The underlying theme constantly battles surface aesthetics. While the neon lights, aftermarket modifications, and throbbing soundtrack establish the cool factor necessary for a blockbuster targeting the demographic hungry for automotive spectacle, the real drama lies in the inevitable betrayal and subsequent redemption. Toretto's final decision to let Brian go, rather than turning him over, is the narrative climax that seals the franchise's future direction. It prioritizes the unspoken bond forged in shared danger over the letter of the law. This moment validates the film's emotional investment in the found family, establishing the principle that the family is the highest authority, a principle that would anchor 2 decades of cinematic narrative. The Fast and the Furious succeeds not just because of the cars, but because it grounds its high-octane pursuits in a very human struggle for identity and belonging. The atmosphere established in those initial Los Angeles scenes is thick with the scent of high-octane fuel and latent rebellion. Everything moves at a pace dictated by the internal clocks of its participants, a stark contrast to the methodical grind of the FBI bureaucracy Brian is ostensibly serving. His performance as the clean-cut agent attempting to infiltrate a world of grime and adrenaline required a delicate balancing act. Paul Walker possessed an inherent, almost boyish charm that made his deception believable, even as the audience rooted for him to fail his superiors. His transformation is subtle. We see the genuine spark of excitement when he's behind the wheel alongside Dom, something rigid training could never replicate. He is drawn to the purity of Toretto's commitment. Dominic Toretto's philosophy extends far beyond mere driving skill. It is a philosophy of self-possession. Vin Diesel, even in this early iteration, projects a monolithic presence. His dialogue is sparse but impactful, weighted with the philosophy derived from a childhood marked by loss, a trauma implicitly referenced when he speaks of those who choose to walk away from family. His garage isn't merely a workspace. It is a sanctuary where mechanical perfection mirrors the order he craves in his chaotic life. The Mitsubishi Eclipse and the Charger are not just cars. They are extensions of his will, objects upon which he imposes order and speed. The supporting ensemble deepens this sense of community. Leon, Jesse, and Vince, each with their own specific roles, the lookout, the tech guy, the muscle, form the infrastructure of Dom's world. They are drawn together by mutual respect for Toretto's leadership and a shared desire to exist outside the system that marginalized them. Jesse's eagerness and subsequent fate serve as the tragic marker of how high the stakes truly are. His death underscores that this life, romanticized by the chrome and speed, carries a lethal cost for inattention or miscalculation. The introduction of Letty Ortiz, played by Michelle Rodriguez, is crucial. She embodies the fierce loyalty and rugged independence that mirrors Dom's own spirit. Her presence validates the legitimacy of the Toretto family. It is not merely a band of associates, but a chosen kin bound by shared survival. Rodriguez brings a raw, untamed energy that perfectly complements Diesel's controlled intensity, establishing a dynamic where passion and protection are intertwined. Their chemistry is immediate and visceral, suggesting a shared history of fighting to maintain their ground. When Brian finally drops the pretense and reveals his true allegiance to Dom, the confrontation is less about immediate physical threat and more about the shattering of foundational trust. The subsequent race, the final, desperate bid to prove his worth, is an emotional necessity for Brian. He needs to show Dom that his respect was earned in the crucible of speed, not fabricated in an interrogation room. Winning that final sprint is not about impressing the FBI. It is about achieving absolution from Dom, a validation that transcends badges and warrants. The act of handing over the keys, signifying his departure and tacit endorsement of Toretto's freedom, is the moment the franchise truly cemented its enduring appeal. The belief that authentic relationships always trump institutional obligation. The film leaves us with the powerful image of two men, separated by their life choices, but permanently linked by a shared, adrenaline-fueled understanding, heading toward vastly different horizons, yet forever defined by that summer in the fast lane. The cinematography of the film often employs a slightly desaturated, sun-bleached palette during daylight scenes, lending an air of gritty realism to the opulent Southern California backdrop. This visual choice subtly undercuts the glamour of the customized vehicles, reminding the viewer that these pursuits take place in the shadows of legitimate society. The sound design reinforces this dichotomy. The roar of the modified engines is almost always layered over the hum of distant city life or the impersonal crackle of police radios, highlighting the perpetual near-miss between the two worlds. The sense of urgency driving the plot, The investigation into the truck hijackings serves primarily as the necessary scaffolding for the personal drama. The trucks themselves, symbols of tangible, legitimate wealth being stolen, are merely the mechanism forcing the intersection of Brian's duty and Dom's illegal enterprise. The actual mechanics of the heists, the daring side door entries and the calculated risks, are secondary to the character dynamics unfolding within the garage. Consider the contrast in the characters' motivations for driving. For Dom, the car is an escape route, a legacy, and a confession. It is rooted in the tragedy of his past, the death of his father, and the need to maintain absolute control over his environment, a control fractured by authority figures. For Brian, early on, the speed is a test, a required proof of masculinity and competence to earn entry into Toretto's inner circle. His proficiency is initially academic. He learns to drive like them because he has to, but the passion flares organically when he starts competing against Dom, not just for the FBI, but for his own validation. The film's limited budget, compared to the sprawling spectacles that would follow, ironically contributes to its emotional immediacy. There is a rawness to the action. The stunts feel grounded, because the environment is recognizably contemporary Los Angeles, not a stylized international playground. The focus remains tight on the protagonists' faces during critical moments, the strain of shifting gears under pressure, the flicker of indecision in Brian's eyes as he weighs his next move against Mia's gaze. The romantic subplot involving Brian and Mia is pivotal in anchoring Brian's betrayal. Mia's unwavering belief in her brother, coupled with her genuine attraction to Brian, forces him into an impossible ethical corner. Her acceptance of Brian, even tentatively, is contingent upon his perceived authenticity. When that authenticity is revealed to be a carefully constructed performance, the devastation is personal, far outweighing the professional failure of the operation. This emotional complexity is what elevates the film beyond standard action fare. The audience invests in the relationships, not just the horsepower. The film leaves the audience understanding that while Toretto may run on adrenaline and loyalty, Brian runs on the promise of finding a place where he truly belongs, a promise Dom inadvertently fulfilled. The legacy of this foundational entry is perhaps most powerfully felt in the lingering ambiguity surrounding the characters' futures, an ambiguity that Hollywood later capitalized upon with relentless expansion. This first chapter concludes not with a neat arrest or a triumphant victory, but with an act of mutual respect carved out of chaos. When Brian O'Connor drives away in Dom's coveted fourth-generation Dodge Charger, it is not a theft. It is a strategic release, a final, silent communication of his choice. He chooses the path of the principled outlaw over the compliant agent, effectively severing his ties with the institution that offered him structure but denied him genuine connection. Dom's quiet acknowledgement of this gesture, letting the Charger go, is the definitive moment where the found family ethos becomes canon. He is not just sparing a friend, he is affirming the Toretto code. Those who prove their mettle and earn their place within the fold are inviolable, regardless of outside affiliations. This scene sets the template for every subsequent installment, where the primary conflict hinges on whether a character can transcend their official obligations for the sake of family. The Charger, an emblem of Dom's past and his identity, is temporarily entrusted to Brian, a symbolic passing of the torch that paradoxically signals their separation while forging an unbreakable link. Furthermore, the film's low-key approach to villainy, where the antagonists are largely interchangeable figures representing external threat rather than deep personal vendettas, underscores the internal focus. The focus remains squarely on the internal struggle for belonging. Johnny Strong, as the primary antagonist, is swiftly dispatched. serving his purpose as the immediate obstacle that forces Brian and Dom to rely on each other one last time before their paths diverge. His lack of deep characterization ensures that the audience's attention never strays from the central dynamic between the two leads. In essence, The Fast and the Furious functions as an origin story for the concept of family as the ultimate narrative currency. It established that speed and spectacular stunts were merely the language through which complex issues of loyalty, class distinction, and the search for authentic community were expressed. The sun sets on Los Angeles, leaving behind the echo of screeching tires and the unspoken promise that these characters, having seen the best and worst of each other under extreme duress, would inevitably be drawn back together by the unbreakable gravity of their shared, high-octane history. It's a beautifully simple premise. An undercover cop falls for the culture he's meant to dismantle, elevated by the sincere, gravelly performances of Diesel and Walker, grounding the spectacle in palpable, relatable human yearning. The very texture of the film's conclusion relies on the implied future careers of its protagonists, a future largely shaped by this initial moral choice. For Brian O'Connor, walking away from the FBI signifies a professional suicide, yet it is his most authentic act. He consciously trades a predictable ascent within a rigid structure for the volatile freedom of the periphery. This decision foreshadows a career spent operating in the gray zones, forever marked by his association with Toretto, a mark that eventually forces him to embrace a life of unofficial yet highly effective law enforcement, a pragmatic realization of the blurred lines he couldn't reconcile within the Bureau. His later career trajectory, often involving him acting as Toretto's necessary bridge back to legitimacy or operating independently with unorthodox methods, is directly seated in this moment of abandonment. Conversely, Dominic Toretto's act of mercy solidifies his identity as a leader who values integrity over self-preservation within the criminal sphere. By allowing Brian to take the car and escape, Dom demonstrates a profound, almost philosophical understanding of honor. He understands that the law, as embodied by the FBI, is an external force, whereas the Toretto Code is internal and absolute. This decision ensures his continued, unquestioned leadership within his street family. No subordinate could ever accuse him of being soft or compromised, as he chose his own definition of justice over the state's. This act becomes the cornerstone of his legend, the tale he would recount to justify future risks taken for friends. The casting choices themselves, even in their early stages, proved instrumental in defining the franchise's aesthetic appeal. Vin Diesel had yet to fully inhabit the action hero persona he would cultivate through roles like the Riddick series, giving his Dom a more contained, almost brooding intensity that felt genuinely dangerous. Paul Walker, fresh from roles showcasing youthful exuberance, here masterfully modulated his natural charisma to convey deep internal conflict. The chemistry between them isn't based on overt displays of affection, but on shared silences in garages and the unspoken language exchanged across the starting line of a race, a testament to understated performance. Even the minor characters play a role in establishing the emotional landscape. The panic and fear displayed by Mia when the operation threatens to consume her, brother, reveal the true stakes. These people are not just petty criminals. They are fiercely bonded individuals whose lives are constantly at risk from external pressures. Her vulnerability is the mirror reflecting the danger Brian poses to the delicate equilibrium of Dom's world. When she watches Brian drive away, there is a quiet acknowledgement that he has chosen the right path for himself, even if it means breaking her heart and potentially sealing her brother's fate by exposing the loose end. The film closes not on triumph, but on a wistful, bittersweet understanding that true loyalty often necessitates painful separations, setting the stage for the inevitable, magnetic pull that will bring them back together in the next chapter to face challenges even greater than the law. The indelible mark left by this debut installment is the successful creation of a cinematic mythology centered on the automotive underworld, one that cleverly disguised melodrama as an action thriller. The film's success wasn't merely in the depiction of fast cars, but in its meticulous construction of a believable social ecosystem built on scarcity and mutual reliance. The poverty level implied beneath the glossy paint jobs and expensive modifications is palpable. These characters are driven by the necessity of immediate gain, symbolized by the high-risk heists, as much as they are by the thrill of speed. Their racing circuits are both playground and marketplace. This economic underpinning explains the allure for both protagonists. For Dom, illegal activity is the only viable path to maintaining the semblance of financial stability for his makeshift family, a direct response to the systemic failures that perhaps left his working-class background behind. For Brian, infiltrating this world is a way to understand a subculture so vibrant and self-sufficient that it challenges the sterile, hierarchical existence offered by his federal employers. He is drawn to the raw, unmediated power Toretto wields over his environment, a power that professional success rarely grants in the early stages of one's career. The film's visual signature, heavily reliant on saturated colors, contrasted with deep shadow during night scenes, mirrors the moral ambiguity of the characters. The daylight scenes, often shot in the sun-drenched, dusty sprawl of industrial Los Angeles, feel exposed and vulnerable, while the nighttime races possess a charged, almost theatrical intimacy, where identities are protected by darkness and speed. This contrast ensures the audience is constantly oscillating between rooting for the excitement of the illicit activity and recognizing the inherent danger it represents. Furthermore, the film wisely utilizes its limited scope to maximize emotional impact. There are no convoluted international plots or world-ending threats. The stakes are purely interpersonal: trust, family, and survival within their tight-knit community. This focus allows the audience to absorb the weight of Toretto's burden, the responsibility of being the patriarch and moral compass for a group of fiercely independent but ultimately vulnerable individuals. When Brian chooses to save Dom by allowing him to escape the police dragnet, it is an act of profound personal allegiance that permanently redefines his professional identity. He becomes, in that instant, the ultimate insider who chooses to protect the secrets of the outsiders, a narrative trajectory that would define his character for years to come. The final image is one of separation, yes, but more profoundly, it is one of shared, hard-won understanding, a bond forged in gasoline fumes and adrenaline that no badge or law could ever erase. The echoes of that final defining choice resonate deeply when considering the evolution of the entire cinematic tapestry that followed. This first film functions as the purest distillation of the series' core conflict, before the scale ballooned to encompass global espionage and impossibly durable patriarchs. Here, the danger is immediate, local, and personal, a fact that lends the emotional beats a far more significant weight. The consequences of Toretto's actions, or Brian's betrayal, are felt directly by the few individuals surrounding them, rather than by abstract nations or organizations. The portrayal of the early Los Angeles racing scene as a meritocracy is crucial to understanding the character's devotion. In this world, pedigree means less than performance. Dom's reverence for his challenger, inherited and painstakingly restored, speaks to a reverence for history and commitment. He respects what has endured. Brian, initially relying on his government-issued resources, must quickly learn that a faster car and superior training are meaningless if you cannot read the road or the opponent's intentions. His gradual adoption of Toretto's street vernacular and mannerisms is not just mimicry for infiltration. It is genuine acclimatization to a more honest form of competition. The women in the narrative, Mia and Letty, serve as the essential emotional anchors that stabilize the two volatile male leads. Mia provides Brian a glimpse into the possibility of normalcy within the chaos, a domestic warmth utterly foreign to his sterile FBI life. Her eventual disillusionment is quieter than Dom's rage, rooted in the realization that the man she cared for was fundamentally dishonest about his allegiance. Letty, by contrast, is already forged in the same fire as Dom. Her loyalty is expressed not through nurturing, but through shared defiance. She is the living embodiment of the family over everything mantra, requiring no explanation or proof of commitment. Her presence confirms that Dom's circle is self-selecting based on resilience, not just shared criminal enterprise. The film's pacing, characterized by sudden bursts of high-speed violence interspersed with long, brooding conversations in dimly lit garages, mirrors the protagonist's internal rhythms. They exist in periods of intense focus, followed by necessary, quiet planning. This rhythmic structure makes the narrative feel lived in and authentic, even when the action stretches the limits of physics. Ultimately, The Fast and the Furious is a story about finding a tribe when the established structures, the police force, the absent father figure, have failed you. Both Dominic and Brian, in their separate ways, are orphans searching for a code to live by, and they briefly find it in the shared pursuit of speed, before the conflicting nature of their identities forces a necessary, heartbreaking schism. The lingering impact of the film stems from its ability to infuse relatively standard action beats with genuine pathos, largely through the committed performances and the elemental simplicity of its central conflict. This is a story where the tools of the trade, the high-end Japanese imports, and the muscle cars are imbued with near-sentient importance. They are not mere props. They are the extensions of ego, skill, and survival. The meticulous detail given to the technical aspects, even if simplified for mainstream consumption, gives the street racing sequences a necessary weight. When Dom discusses the fragility of the internal combustion engine or the necessity of nitrous oxide injection, he speaks with the gravity of a priest discussing scripture, underlining that this culture demands deep, almost spiritual engagement. Brian O'Connor's initial competence is laced with a significant amount of bluffing, a facade that begins to crumble once he truly tastes the freedom associated with Toretto's lifestyle. Paul Walker effectively communicates the internal conflict. The thrill of living outside the rules is intoxicating, but the knowledge of the ticking clock on his deception creates a constant, low-level anxiety visible in his facial expressions during tense moments with Mia. He is caught between two loyalties, and the film excels at portraying this duality not as a strategic dilemma, but as an agonizing personal fracture. He doesn't just risk his career, he risks losing the first place he has ever felt truly accepted. The stark contrast between the Toretto garage, characterized by oil stains, loud music, and immediate, tangible results, and the sterile beige offices of the FBI headquarters further emphasizes the cultural chasm Brian is attempting to bridge. The FBI represents a world where credit is bureaucratic, recognition is delayed, and passion is actively suppressed in favor of procedure. Toretto's world, while illegal, offers instant validation based on tangible skill displayed under extreme pressure. This fundamental difference in reward systems is what ultimately pulls Brian away from the badge and toward the pavement. The film's ultimate success lies in making the audience complicit in the moral compromise. We want Brian to succeed in his mission, yet we desperately hope he fails his superiors so that he can remain within the electrifying orbit of Dom and his family. The emotional payoff of the final act is derived precisely from this manufactured internal conflict within the audience. When Brian hands over the evidence that could incriminate Dom, then subtly alters the outcome by allowing Dom the head start, he completes his narrative arc not as a federal agent, but as an honorary member of the Street family, a man who chose respect earned over authority bestowed. This choice, messy and profoundly disloyal to his employer, is presented as the only honorable outcome, establishing the moral blueprint for the entire saga. The recurring motif of the street race itself transcends simple competition. It is a public declaration of status, a highly ritualized form of confrontation where threats are issued and respect is negotiated without direct physical violence until the very fringes of the plot. These sequences operate on a level beyond mere speed, demanding an almost psychic connection between driver and machine. The camera work during these high-velocity moments often sacrifices clarity for kinetic energy, mirroring the sensory overload experienced by the participants. We are not just watching cars move fast, we are feeling the G-forces, the desperate clawing for traction, and the split-second judgment calls that separate life from the crumpled metal of a wreck. Dominic Toretto's almost religious adherence to the sanctity of the car, especially his Charger, reflects a deeper commitment to preserving the legacy of his father, a narrative thread that is subtle but pervasive. The car is an artifact of trauma and resilience. His protective stance over his crew stems from the fear of witnessing another premature loss, a fear that fuels his almost paternalistic oversight of Letty and even his guarded acceptance of Brian. This intensity, often misinterpreted by outsiders as mere aggression, is rooted in profound, deeply buried grief. Paul Walker's Brian, during his undercover tenure, shows moments where the disguise slips, revealing an innate affinity for this counterculture. There are scenes where he stands on the periphery of Toretto's group, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips as he watches the organized chaos unfold. He is initially playing a role, but the role begins to fit too comfortably. His infiltration is less about gathering evidence and more about auditioning for a role he never knew he needed, that of belonging to a group that values directness over protocol. His performance is a slow-burn seduction by authenticity. The subplot involving the truck hijackings, the central criminal enterprise, serves effectively as a necessary, though largely secondary, plot device to force cooperation between Brian and Dom. The logistics of the heist, the physical danger of hanging off moving tractor-trailers, primarily function to test the developing trust between the two leads under duress. They must rely on each other's specific skills, Dom's supreme driving command and Brian's tactical positioning, to succeed, thus manufacturing the intimate bonds of wartime comrades regardless of their opposing affiliations. The money gained is less important than the shared experience it facilitates. When the inevitable confrontation arrives, it is emotionally devastating precisely because the audience has witnessed the genuine growth of Brian's attachment to the Toretto dynamic. His final decision to sacrifice his career is an act of self-creation. He is choosing the identity he has built over the one assigned to him. This refusal to be a conventional hero, by choosing ethical loyalty to an individual over professional duty to an institution, is the foundation upon which the entire sprawling franchise will eventually be built. The unwavering, sometimes illogical, primacy of family. The film ends not with resolution, but with a powerful, open-ended commitment to an unconventional moral code. The enduring power of this initial installment resides in its refusal to fully condemn the criminal lifestyle it portrays. Instead, it frames the pursuit of speed and illicit gains as a manifestation of societal disenfranchisement. The characters inhabit a world where conventional avenues for success are either inaccessible or undesirable, making the street racing circuit their primary arena for self-definition. This economic reality sharpens the moral choices faced by both Toretto and O'Connor. Toretto's commitment to the heist is driven by the need to provide for his crew, a substitute for the security the legitimate world failed to offer them, while Brian seeks validation in a system that initially underestimated him. Vin Diesel's physical presence commands the screen, projecting a stoicism that often borders on melancholy. His gruff pronouncements about loyalty and betrayal are delivered with a conviction that suggests deep, lived experience, drawing heavily on the archetypal figure of the tragic hero bound by unbreakable oaths. He is the guardian of a fragile, self-made dynasty. His quiet moments, often seen leaning against his cars or staring out at the city lights, betray the immense pressure of maintaining this facade of control against the ever-present threat of exposure or death. Paul Walker's performance as Brian is a study in performative assimilation. We see the internal struggle in the stiffness of his posture when first interacting with the crew, gradually softening into the relaxed confidence of someone who has finally found a place where his skills are truly appreciated, not merely cataloged. His transformation is fundamentally about shedding the skin of the lawman to reveal the adrenaline junkie underneath. The shared experiences, the near misses during the heists, the late-night mechanical tinkering, the unspoken camaraderie over beers, act as powerful bonding agents, slowly eroding the professional barriers he erected. Mia Toretto acts as the humanizing element, the soft center around which the harder edges of the male conflict revolve. Her attraction to Brian is intrinsically linked to the sense of possibility he represents. A life slightly cleaner, perhaps, but one that still involves risk and excitement. Her pain upon discovering Brian's deception is perhaps the most profound emotional beat of the film, as she realizes her trust was weaponized by an outside force. Her subsequent reconciliation with Brian, conditional as it is, validates his final, agonizing decision to choose loyalty to her brother over his directive. The climactic moment where Brian chooses to let Dom escape, sacrificing his established career and future, is framed not as a simple act of friendship, but as a necessary alignment of personal morality. He proves to Dom that he understands the Toretto Code. By relinquishing control of the investigation and handing over the reins of his government-issued vehicle, Brian publicly endorses the superiority of chosen family over inherited obligation. This moment seals the franchise's philosophical foundation, that true allegiance is earned through shared adversity, and the bonds forged in high-speed risk always supersede the dictates of the state. The film closes with both men moving forward, irrevocably changed, forever defined by the moment they recognized an honorable man on the opposite side of the law. The residual feeling upon completing the analysis of the initial Fast and Furious narrative is one of profound thematic efficiency. This film, constrained by its budget and era, achieves a level of intimacy that later installments, with their global stakes and reliance on increasingly improbable physics, could only attempt to replicate through sheer spectacle. The story functions as a perfect, closed loop, where the initial conditions of deceit naturally resolve into an authentic, albeit outlaw, bond. The atmosphere of early 2000s automotive tuning culture, vividly captured here, is characterized by a specific blend of technological enthusiasm and blue-collar grit. The focus on specific car models, the street racers' preferred Japanese imports versus Dom's heavy-hitting American muscle, is a subtle indicator of their differing worldviews. Brian, the infiltrator, initially drives what is fast and cutting edge for the street scene, fitting in quickly, while Dom's choice of the Charger signifies a deep connection to heritage and raw, uncompromising power, a rejection of ephemeral trends for something enduring. The genius of the script lies in how it utilizes the undercover dynamic to fast-track emotional intimacy. Brian cannot afford to remain detached. Survival within Toretto's circle demands participation. Every gear shift, every shared risk in the heist serves as a substitute for months, perhaps years, of conventional relationship building. The audience witnesses the chemistry developing in real time, fueled by adrenaline, making the eventual allegiance shift feel earned rather than contrived. Letty Ortiz, played with defiant energy by Michelle Rodriguez, serves as the litmus test for Brian's sincerity. She represents the untamed spirit of the Toretto collective, possessing zero tolerance for weakness or deception. Her approval, or at least her non-confrontational acceptance, signals that Brian is beginning to pass the unwritten tests of the street code. Her loyalty is fierce and immediate, reflecting the inherent dangers of their lifestyle where hesitation can be fatal. She embodies the inherent risk of loving someone whose life is constantly balanced on the edge of a cliff. The final act, centered on the decision to let Dom walk, reframes the entire narrative from a crime thriller into a modern Western morality play. The law is portrayed as rigid, impersonal, and ultimately less ethical than the fiercely protective, if criminal, code of the street family. Brian doesn't just let a suspect go. He sheds the uniform that defines him, choosing instead the moral complexity of his chosen brotherhood. This deliberate narrative choice, the hero choosing the outlaw, is the essential DNA injected into the subsequent sequels, guaranteeing that the franchise would perpetually prioritize blood ties and loyalty over civic duty, a theme that allows the narrative to continually find justification for Toretto's increasingly unbelievable actions moving forward. The thematic inheritance of this foundational choice is palpable in every subsequent iteration of the Fast saga. The moment Brian hands Dom the keys and steps away from the wreckage of his FBI career, he solidifies the franchise's central, almost subversive thesis: that genuine honor exists outside the sanction of legitimate authority. This act isn't just a personal failure for the Bureau, it's a foundational victory for the concept of the found family. Brian essentially becomes the first martyr for the Toretto Code, a man who understands that some debts, the debt of rescue, the debt of shared survival, can never be repaid with promotions or commendations. The visual language established here, though lower in budget than later offerings, possesses a distinct, gritty authenticity. The neon glow reflecting off wet asphalt during illegal meets feels organic, not digitally manufactured. This visual commitment grounds the characters' intense emotional states. Their desperation, their fleeting joys, are set against a recognizable, tangible urban landscape, making their high-stakes maneuvering feel immediate rather than fantastical. The cars themselves, viewed under the harsh fluorescence of Toretto's garage, look like hard-won trophies rather than disposable plot mechanisms. Dominic Toretto's quiet intensity in the aftermath of Brian's choice speaks volumes about his leadership. He offers no grand pronouncements. His acceptance is shown in the slight nod, the understanding that passes between men who have seen the worst and best of each other under pressure. This non-verbal communication is the true language of the Toretto family, a deep, almost masculine empathy forged in mutual vulnerability. For Dom, Brian's decision validates his life philosophy. That true character is revealed not in comfort, but in moments of absolute sacrifice. He has finally encountered an outsider whose loyalty he cannot doubt. because that loyalty cost him everything professional. The tragedy embedded in the ending, the necessary separation, is what gives the subsequent returns of these characters such emotional weight. They are not merely reunited for a job. They are drawn back together by the gravitational pull of an unfinished moral contract. Brian's continued, albeit unofficial, protection of Dom ensures he remains a figure constantly looking over his shoulder, forever tethered to the life he formerly abandoned. This dual existence, the clean-cut dad living on borrowed time while protecting his outlaw ties, becomes his cross to bear, ensuring that his character arc, even after his eventual tragic exit from the main narrative, is always shaded by the compromises made on that sun-drenched L.A. street. The franchise is built on the reverberations of this first, pivotal act of letting go. The very air of possibility that Brian's defection introduces is what allows the series to later justify increasingly outlandish scenarios. Without the foundational premise that the FBI is fundamentally flawed, that its structures crush genuine human connection, the subsequent global escapades would lack moral grounding. This initial film posits that the greatest loyalty one can possess is not to the flag or the department, but to the individual